That's what we did. Not everything is always resolved. Not every marriage is put back up on its feet and continues and endures. All right? We've lost some pretty dramatic marriages. I had one marriage that didn't last 30 days. Wow. I had told them before they got married, I said, you have a clash of cultures going here between you two. One guy was Cuban and she was Midwestern American, and while he's a great person to date, his culture required most of the work from the wife. And he just basically sat with his feet up. And I said, you're not going to really like that too much. And as soon as the wedding was over, she came crying to me. It's like I'm married to a different person than I was dating. Well, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so it doesn't always resolve. She decided better to call it quits early, because the chances of taking this fellow in the 40-year-old area and changing his pattern of what he thought would work as a husband and wife relationship was pretty minimal, and that was the end of that. I also had a young couple that didn't last about 6 months. I had counseled them early, and I had told the young lady, please, please, please postpone this wedding. The chances that I had of getting it canceled were higher if we could push back the date a bit farther. If you could just wait for a while, please don't do this. I actually took her on a long walk on one Saturday morning, and I said, I left him at the church, and we went for a walk around through the neighborhood. And I said, let me tell you a story of a young lady who married a person she thought would make a good husband. He was so demanding and so angry and so bitter that he beat her and forced her to do a lot of things she didn't want to do, and was a terrible companion, and she stayed with him because it was the only life she had known, because she'd been abused as a child, and just sort of expected it, thought she had it coming. How do you feel about that story? She said, I think that's a terrible story. Terrible, terrible story. I said, yes, that's the mother-in-law you're going to live with in this marriage. And she has, and his father has, taught him to act the same way toward you. They only have one goal, and he said this out loud. I want to marry just like Mommy and Daddy had. All right? He was only about 18, 19. He told me flat out to my face, I'm not going to believe a word you say because I don't have any confidence in you at all. I know better what needs to be done than you do. And that's not just because I had advised against it. But you see, he was going to repeat what his mother and father had in their relationship. She didn't grow up that way, and I knew that, and her family wasn't expecting it. Before 6 months, he had beat her. She aborted a child from the beating. Almost left him at that point. Found herself pregnant again. He beat her again, and she left him. And so what that tells me is this. When we decide to follow Jesus Christ, we have a lot of potential for good. But there's still a sinful nature within people that are going to just drive us crazy. All right? Don't think we can solve every single thing, but Jesus Christ gave us tools that we can use to help resolve tense relationships or difficult relationships most of the time. Because That's what he came to do. He came to share how to love. And so what we did last week is we had some handouts. Anybody need another copy of the handout? Okay. As my friend in Indiana says, he and his wife Christy, they get into one of these spats and they start to go, oh yeah, we're going into one of those crazy cycles. We're going into one of the crazy cycles. Yeah. Well, let's just stop before it gets too bad. And if you can actually start intervening into the cycle of conflict earlier, you can cut across the middle of this thing and come out over here on the other side without going quite so deeply down into hostility and bitterness and resentment and hatred. And so that really means you've gone all the way through the crazy cycle. All right? We want to intervene just a little earlier, and we want to stop when we see that there's difficulty. Why do we have conflict? Because conflict is the definition of two people with different ideas on how to do things, and we don't learn from each other what the other holds as important until we get into a tense situation. And somebody rears back on their hind legs and says, I'm not happy here. That's what conflict is. It's the conditional love that we share scripturally. It's a very valid concept. We have unconditional love and we have conditional love. And the conditional love says, in order for me to be happy, you have to do some things to help me be happy. Jesus, when he said to his disciples, remember last week we had the bulletin board over here. If you want to be my friends, you have to obey my commands. That's conditional love. And what we say in relationships is once in a while somebody gets upset and say, look, I remember not too many years ago, Judy, during tax season, with all the demands on her, said, Bob, I'm still washing all the dishes. Now, I don't mind making the meals, but cleaning up afterwards is driving me crazy, and I'm too tired to do all of that. Something close to that. It was said with a little more energy than that. But that was more or less the content. I'm still washing the dishes. Tax season is long gone, thing of the past, but you know what? She was right. She was right. It doesn't hurt to share, and if she's willing to put the creativity into making the meals, I mean, washing the plates off and putting them in the dishwasher is not that big of a deal. And so, the conditional love is what we say, okay, now we have to catch this cycle before it gets down in here into the really, really intense part of it. We cut straight across. We go through the reconciliation. We make a new action plan, and we start again. All right? So that's what we talked about in the last week. And then the second page is a list of the 10 rules. The 10 rules, honestly, I will make you as many copies as you wish. You can put one in the bedroom on the wall. You can put them on the kitchen refrigerator. Put them any place that it would help you. All right? Because the 10 rules, we violate them all the time. All right? Now, these are worded in such a way that it talks about differences of opinion, conflicts within the body of Christ, the church. But if you had them change just a few words, you can see that these would actually apply to just about any relationship we would ever have. Marriages, I can make you a copy of the marriage one. I can give you a copy of one for the business that you work in. I mean, even your sports club. Because we're going to get into these squabbles once in a while because nobody does it exactly like we do it on every way. And so we come to the point where we say, the least possible damage to our permanent, most important relationships happen if we follow these 10 rules. We can fix anything. We can fix anything in any relationship But if we do more damage, it takes longer. Trust is something that builds up over time. Now, I don't know. There was a miracle here about January 10th. I don't know how else you can describe it. But you welcomed me into your community on January 10th, and you trusted me. That doesn't normally happen. Most pastors have to stay about a year or 18 months before people go, well, I think he'll be okay eventually if he can straighten out a few kinks, all right? You've given me tremendous opportunities here to serve you. And so quickly, I can't thank you enough. But trust is easily broken. And once trust is broken, it takes even a longer time to put it back together. And so, my urging, my pleading with you is to make sure that we do the least possible damage on every level in every one of our relationships. What I'm doing is saying, you have people outside of this building that have never heard this stuff. They don't have a clue as how to fight fair. The only thing they know, did you see the picture of the guy who stepped forward and sucker punched one of the protesters the other night on the news? Completely hidden. I mean, he had his fist down low, and as the guy walked by completely defenseless, he just reached up and punched him right in the face as hard as he could. Well, I've been punched that way a time or two. Her name was Linda Smith. I can tell you this story. It doesn't feel good. Some people don't have any other ways of coping than just to try and win, no matter what the penalty is or what the repair work has to be done afterwards. Now, the guy that did the sucker punch is probably going to spend some time in jail for assault. He wasn't really expecting to have to pay that kind of a penalty. In our relationships, we have repair work that we have to do. So last week, we rolled the board over here and we talked about Jesus' command to love as he had loved us. What was the definition of love that he used?
Love one another as the Father has loved.
As I have loved you. He didn't give a long, flowery definition of love. Now this is long detail, all right? I'm not as good as he was. All right, I use a lot more words sometimes. But what did he say? He said, as I have loved you. So if we learn about Jesus and we learn about how he loved, then we'll know a lot about how to make the application to ourselves. So the first rule that we looked at last week, and we sort of started with this as a way of beginning to break open the discussion. Start every argument or discussion or debate or however you want to phrase that, beginning the opening salvo by saying, I love you, I will always love you, nothing you're going to say is going to stop me from loving you, and even though we have a difference of agreement, that doesn't change my underlying commitment to take care of you. If it's within the church, we say it as a brother or sister in the Lord. If it's at home, it's in the context of husband and wife, and we say it over and over again. And as soon as it starts to get a little bit emotional, as we share what's upsetting us, we say it again. Why? Because it diffuses the fear. What's always the fear when we're having a discussion like this? What's the underlying fear if we're having a discussion and a disagreement?
Separation.
Is this going to separate us? Is this going to break what we've needed for so long? Is this going to ruin something we need very deeply? And once we say it out loud and we do it well, that fear is diffused. Now we can begin to listen and we can hear and we can respond differently because we don't have to worry about the big fear. Is this going to be the one that ends it? Okay? Because they've already said, this isn't going to end it. I already make you that promise and that covenant. All right, so from this point forward, as we go down through the list, we're going to go through several tonight, try and finish halfway down the list, and we'll finish the next ones to next Sunday. And then Easter, we have a special program on Easter evening. So we're hoping that this will all be finished. We'll have that special program on Easter evening, and we can come back to something more fresh and enlightening and wonderful when we get back after Easter. All right? Number 2, the rule says, I love you just the way you are. Some things can't be changed. Some things you couldn't change, even if I demanded it of you. I won't ask you to change these things. Backgrounds of family life, our walk of faith, what it's taken us to come to this point, our personality, our values, our gifts that God has blessed us with, are most difficult to change. We just won't argue about those things. There's a certain part of this discussion where we have to say, I'm filled with the apostolic gift. I'm the prophet. And my first words that come out of my mouth are, thou shalt not. And I can add a whole lot of stuff on there. All right. Thou shalt not drive a Ford because Chevrolets are the best on the road. All right. Didn't even get an amen. No. And usually it's on secondary, less important issues, but I've got the apostolic gift, and I can say it boldly. I know what should be done, and I know what shouldn't be done, and I know what you should do. And let's say the person they're talking to has the gift of mercy. The gift of mercy says, relax, it's going to be okay. I'll take care of things, and I will get it back together. We'll get it fixed up. All right? And they're a great reconciler. You can't have both gifts in the same person. There's sort of an internal conflict. So which one's right and which one's wrong?
Depends
I'm
on
sorry, I didn't hear.
Neither one.
Neither one are right. Oh, I knew that was going to be a problem. No. One's right sometimes, and one's right other times. And it's the two working together that find an appropriate place where each one is applied correctly. If the apostolic gift is, what am I saying here? Who's Paul? The Apostle Paul, Book of Acts. Neil, they've been teaching in the Book of Acts. What's his gift?
Evangelism.
Apostolic. I'm going to tell you the way God's done this thing, and you better listen. But who does he take with him? Barnabas or Silas. And they're the ones who are the reconcilers, the encouragers. And when Paul shakes the earth with his thundering statements and his arguments that just change the world, Barnabas and Silas are sitting there holding the people who are trying, be patient, it's going to be okay. He's got quite a way about him. But let's talk about Jesus. And see, it takes both gifts. They were working together because it takes both gifts to get it done. And one helps the other one be more effective. All right? All right, now, Paul and Barnabas argued about this very thing. Mark left in the middle of the first missionary trip. Paul was, thou shalt not leave in the middle of a missionary trip. What did Barnabas say? Relax, Paul. It was okay. He's young. It was his first time. I mean, he wasn't feeling good, and it was strange, and they were weird food, and his stomach was upset, and he missed his mother, and give him a break. He's okay. He's underneath everything. Barnabas was doing his Barnabas thing. Paul was doing his Paul thing. And they got into trouble. They got into a debate. So finally, Barnabas said, I'll take Mark with me, and you take Silas, and you go on the second one. They found a way of getting through it. Is it bad to have a debate or an argument within the body of Christ? No, we're going to have them. But we better do it well. Because people can get damaged. Do you understand? People can get damaged. If somehow a person with the apostolic gift says, I don't think a person with the gift of mercy is really, really gifted by God. I don't think that's a real legitimate gift. I once had a pastor friend of mine who got up in the pulpit numerous different times and said, I have the gift of evangelism. And if anybody has the gift of teaching, they're just wasting your time, because evangelism is the only gift that takes people from being unbelievers to being believers, lost and going to hell, and being set on the narrow path that leads to heaven. And anybody that just teaches is just wasting your time, because all that teaching just goes out of your head and it gets lost. And believe me, I know a lot of it does. I'm not arguing that. But what he was doing was pointing from the pulpit down to the pew where I was sitting, because I had one of the biggest classes in the church at that point, and saying, you don't count. Well, just because he said it was true didn't mean it was true. All right? I want you to understand, letting people be who they are in these underlying foundational issues is a very important way of saying, I love you. I love the Lord that gave you those gifts. I love the Lord that gave you that personality. I love the Lord that has brought you through that family experience or that walk of faith experience. Is it pouring down rain?
Yes.
My hearing aids were rattling, and I wasn't sure whether it was static because I'm losing a battery or whether it's anyway. So if you don't celebrate the fact that we have differences, you're going to be on each other's nerves all the time. All right? Whether it's in the family or whether it's at work or whatever. And so we have to just recognize we have different roles, we have different gifts, we have different responsibilities, and we come at things from different points of experience. All right, number 3. I'm sorry, any questions about this verse?
Interesting that some things can't be changed, and then goes through this list of things, and every one of those things is real potential for personal rubs.
Oh, this is rough stuff. Some of the best things that have ever happened in my life have been people with sandpaper personalities, because they took a lot of sharp edges off of me. And a silly story again, all right? I had a very good friend, Lawrence Winslow, out in Iowa. He was a rough character. I mean, he was sandpaper, 80 grit. All right. It'll put a blister on you if you let it rub wrong. I loved Lawrence Winslow, and we got along famously just because I refused to let him get next to my hide and rough me up. All right? I had to keep him just a little bit away, because otherwise the friction, he was not a pastor, he was a friend of mine, he was a wonderful co-worker, he was a brother in the Lord, we got along great, but he came from a whole different place than I did. The next pastor, I talked to him last summer, and I said, Harry, how was your experience in Wapello? He said, Lawrence Winslow rubbed me raw. It was so sad to hear that. I knew who Lawrence was. In his heart of hearts, he was a wonderful, godly man. But his personality was rough. And Pastor Harry couldn't find a way of coping with a difficult personality and staying sweet. And there was friction. I wish it hadn't happened. If Harry had given me a call, I think in about 3 or 4 minutes I could have given him an explanation how to get along with Lawrence, that it would have been just a lot easier to get along with. Had a man come to me while I was pastor at the Fort Wayne Church, and he handed me a $75 subscription ticket, a ticket to a conference. And the conference was how to deal with difficult people. And he says, you have me in your congregation. You're going to need to attend this because I'm going to stay right here involved in this congregation. You better know how to deal with me. I gave it back to him. I said, get your $75 back. I already got it. One of my best friends ever. But it wasn't easy. Because he was rough. He was so rough, he'd actually been locked up in a psychiatric ward 3 different times. Because he got so carried away that they had to pull him back and say, no, got to put you back on balance. It was such a wonderful relationship that he came to me shortly after I came there to spend 5 years in Fort Wayne and said, I trust you. I'm going to have you be one of the 3 or 4 people in my life that I put in your hands the keys to my mind. And if you see me doing anything, thinking anything, following a pattern that you think is dangerous, all you have to do is say, stop. And I will stop. That's the kind of relationship we had after 5 years. I mean, very shortly, and it lasted for 5 years. You don't have to have identical personalities to appreciate and treasure someone who's different, coming from a different place. Okay? Anyone else? These are important keys. How did Jesus love Peter? As he was. How did he love Judas? I'm sorry to say it. As he was. And they stayed together for 3 years. There's a mystery for you. You want to scratch your head over something? Pray about that one for a while.
And he knew he would betray him.
Absolutely. Knew it from the minute he said, hey, I choose you, come with me. And loved him. And blessed him. And washed his feet.
And didn't try to change it.
Who changes people? The only one that really changes people, the one that gives us our gifts, the one who gave us our personalities, is the Spirit of God. I leave it for Him. I leave it for Him. Now, we can change some behaviors, and sometimes behaviors are challenging on their own, because there are some behaviors that are hurtful, there are some behaviors that are not helpful, but some of these underlying issues, we have to just set them off to the side and say, I love you just the way you are. Okay? We can come back to it if you have more questions, but let me jump forward just a second to number 3. The definition of what we're doing here is, we had the board here last week, love as I have loved you. We're defining what it means to love as Jesus loved. Okay? The 2 pillars that supported his entire ministry. How did he do it? This is the nuts and bolts of how it happened. I love you too much to harm you. We are all vulnerable to severe harm on certain issues. They include past mistakes, sensitivities, insecurities, fears, or guilts. I will not subject you to harm by raising these things, especially when we're in the middle of an argument. Okay? Silly story. Important story, but also a painful one. I had taken one couple, a senior citizen who was almost in his 70s and his 50 plus. I didn't actually get into the details of just where she was in her 50s. We're going to be married. And they came to me and they said, would you do the wedding ceremony? I said, sure, as long as you do the premarital counseling. And he laughed out loud. He said, I'm 70 years old. What are you going to teach me about being married? I've been married 50 years, you know. My first wife died after being an invalid for many, many years. And, you know, I knew all the story. I said, yeah, but you have never been married to her. I got a thing or two I can share with you. All right? She'd never been married. Raised 4 children. And I told you that after I get to know you a little bit, I sometimes pull a trick and get you into an argument just to see if you've learned anything from the lessons we've been learning. I promise not to do it here, it's not that, but I do that with my premarital couples because we get pretty close. We get to be very good friends. I don't think I've ever had a premarital couple that I wasn't best friends with from then on for the rest of time. Maybe the one that knew his wife and lost a baby, I don't think I've kept in contact with him, but almost everybody else has been appreciative of what we've done. They listened to the lessons. They really enjoyed them. We laughed like we always do. Great fun, exciting time, things to look forward to. We got ready for the last session. And they said, okay, Pastor Bob, why don't you come over to our new house where we're going to be living and have a last session over there? I said, fine. Sounds like a good idea. So the time came, and I walked down the street to where their house was, and I knocked on the door. Nobody answered the door. So I knocked louder. Nobody came to the door. So I knocked even louder. And she came to the door. I mean, her mascara was dripping off of her chin. She, oh, it's all off. We had a terrible fight. We said awful things to each other. Oh, it's all over. It's all over. It's all over. We can't do it. And until the day she died, she said, I will never, ever, ever forget the sound of your laughter when you went, okay, all right, now we're ready to get started. And I laughed. Where do we work? And we went downstairs to the family room, and there he sat, sad face, I mean, he was miserable. And she stood clear over on the other side of the room with her back up against the kitchen counter. I said, okay. Now let me just ask a couple of questions. I turned to her and I said, remember in our first session, we were talking about the 10 rules. And I said, there are certain things that we're never, ever, ever going to bring up and speak about, ever. They're completely off the table. Do you remember? And we actually told each other, promised each other that they were never, ever going to be said again. She says, oh yes, I remember. I said, please tell me you didn't say that thing. And she said, it was the very first thing I said after he got angry with me. And I turned to him, and I said, please tell me that the things we said you were never ever going to speak out loud again, you never said those things. And he said, don't go any farther. It was the first thing out of my mouth as soon as it was. Why? Because we all have vulnerabilities. We all have soft spots. We all have things we don't feel good about ourselves. Some people have body image. And I still have my hair, but it's all white. I had to get over that years ago. All right? If they call me an old fogey, I go, yeah, we look that way on the outside. And I write it off. But some people are really sensitive about their body image. And if you said something that you knew that they really were sensitive about, just to win, shame on you. All right? Other people have had mistakes. Now, once a mistake has been made, it's been recognized, it's been apologized for, it's been forgiven, it's off the book. You're not allowed to bring it up ever again. All right? It's done. It's finished. We close the door on that room, and it's done. It's over. Very hard to do that in the church. You know why? People have long memories. Man, I remember 1955, we were in a scuffle, and you said, but I was having a bad day. Doesn't count. I'm going to remember. There are some things we just have to say, I'm never going to bring up. It's too harmful. It cuts too deep. And sometimes it's just... Pastor up at the Redeemer Lutheran Church had the Lenten service last Wednesday. And he started off saying, there are 6 words or something, I forget now how he started, that is the curse of every single Christian. And he said, every time we bump into something, he just says, well, that's the way I am. That's just the way I am. And he said, it goes in direct contradiction to what Jesus Christ told us to do. And if it goes in contradiction, then it's not sufficient. It isn't legal for us to just simply say, well, that's just the way I am. All right? There are some things we're just not allowed to say because it feels good to say them at the time. And it may even get us closer to winning the argument or having our idea prevail. This is not loving, all right? And we have to discipline ourselves. It's so hard because when does discipline break down the first? When we get charged up emotionally. We get our passions all worked up, and then the first thing that comes out of our mouth is our winning shot. All right? It may be our last shot. It may be our first shot. But we have to give it our best shot. And it's not healthy. It's not Christian. It's not loving. So we have to discipline ourselves to put those things aside. Now, how do we know what they are? The closer our relationships are, the more aware we are of what the other person feels most vulnerable about. When Judy and I were dating, she had no idea how she could hurt me. She could say anything. I'd go, okay. Married 46 years, almost. She knows exactly where she could hurt me. Can't cover them up. You be in the church 20 years together, you know where people are sensitive. Someone said if you have trouble forgetting old hurts, then you better get really, really good at forgiving. And every single time we get into one of these little debates, discussions, little places where somebody's feelings get offended, we ought to just be pouring it all. I don't know what you have in your little medicine drawer, but I've got triaminic something or other, antibiotic, it's like in a petroleum jelly mix. It's got some stuff in it that helps the little stuff on there, get my thin skin heal up a little faster. We ought to be just squeezing juice out of those things of God's Word and putting that balm on and helping heal up those scuffs and those little abrasions, because we never want them to come up again and have another issue where someone might get hurt because something's still just a little bit raw and tender. Okay? Any questions on that one? What breaks down trust faster than anything else? Bring up what happened 10 years ago. Because you know what? Our human nature says, I remember too. Let me share with you a couple things I remember. And then you've declared war. Not supposed to be done in the church. Not supposed to be done in the family of God. Not supposed to be done in the marriage. Close the door on it. It's been forgiven. It's been taken care of. It's over. All right? We move on from there. Okay, number 4. I love you too much to open you to public ridicule. We must keep our discussions within limits. There will always be people who we can turn to for help, counselors, helpers, advisors. But to go around telling people about our personal conflicts or disagreements will open our most personal feelings and thoughts to everybody. Keep the discussion in the meeting, work on the issue inside that forum. The reason Jesus said, go to your brother and work it out, and if you do have to take 2 people with you, or a person or so, it's still within a very confined limit. We don't want to take someone who may have a disagreement with us out into the public realm. Now, what's our first and biggest temptation when something happens that we're not really agreeing with or having difficulty with? What's our first temptation? First temptation. What was that?
Go find somebody to agree with you.
Neil, you're reading my mind. You gotta stop reading my mind. All right? We go to people that we already know agree with us. We already know. They are upset, or they could be upset, or they have in the past been upset over the same kinds of things we've been upset about. And we start rehearsing them. Well, what do you think we ought to do about that? I don't think that's probably the right thing. So instead of going to the person we're having a disagreement with, we're going to find how many allies we can hook up with that agree with us. I taught Sunday school one Sunday at Grace Baptist Church. It was a good lesson. Whoa, I was right on. I was on the money. Perfect. Talking about Paul. The next week I got a letter. There are 8 couples in the class who are ready to walk out if you teach another lesson in our Sunday school class. Now, think about that for a while, and you say, the person had already gone through the class list and talked with everyone, especially those that he thought might be agreeing with him, and had come up with an exact number of people who were going to walk out the next time I went up to take the podium. Is that what Jesus suggested in Matthew? Was that the way he decided to do it? That's the way Baptists do it. I don't know what Nazarenes do. That's what Baptists do. They get as many people on the signatures on the petition as they can get. And then they tell you, here's what you got to do, or we're going to be upset. That isn't Matthew 18. It's wrong. It's unloving. It's unchristlike. It's in direct violation of what Jesus Christ did. Let me tell you, was I upset? No. I turned the book over to the Sunday school superintendent. I said, you might want to get somebody else to teach this class. And they said, yeah, we've heard. That's probably a good idea. I'm not going to fight over it. It's a Sunday school lesson. Not worth discussing. I wasn't Baptist. That's the only discussion. And I couldn't change that on a bat. And they weren't going to have anybody that didn't have Baptist in their credential teaching them. Did I say something wrong? No. Did I teach anything that was incorrect? No. Did I offend anybody? No. Did I harm anybody's spiritual walk? No. But they were not going to allow anyone to teach who happened to have an ordination with the Church of God. End of discussion. Was it immoral? Was I having a moral issue? No. Was I having a doctrinal issue with what they were doing? No. Should it have been an issue at all? I mean, when we start to think about it, we categorize discussions and conflicts within the church by putting them on a scale. All right? We weigh how much we should take seriously the difficulty we're facing on the basis of how do we weigh them out? All right? What's the first thing? The heaviest weight that could possibly be. Is it immoral? Is it promoting something immoral? Well, yeah. Then we're going to stand right up on our hind legs and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Is it standing up for something unethical? Do I have to compromise my principles to accept what you're saying or teaching? In other words, if you're suggesting that I cheat on my taxes, shave it off just a little bit, change the way I calculate them so I don't have to pay quite as many taxes, that puts me in an ethical bind. I can't do that. I have to stop and say no. Is it anti-scriptural? Is it something contrary to Scripture? No. Is it unchristlike? No. But you see, I'm getting down farther and farther in the list, and each one of the charges weighs less. All right? Would Jesus have said the very same thing you said? Well, maybe if he was dealing with the same person I was. No. Oh, I've gone 10. Oh my God. Please forgive me, I've gone 10 over. All right? Do you get the idea of what we're doing here? There are some things, when we get in here to saying, when we go round and round and round with people who are not primarily involved in the issue, we're making somebody feel really stupid or ridiculous or embarrassed and ashamed, and that's harming them. That's unloving. It's not Christ-like. And we've got to simply discipline ourselves to stop doing this kind of thing, because I've seen so many people that said, you know, I've gone to all my ladies' prayer group, and they all agree that you're wrong, my husband, and you shouldn't do things. Well, you mean you've told every one of your friends what I said or what I did when I was really having a terrible bad day, and I can't apologize to all of them? I can only apologize to you, and now I'm going to be the butt of all these jokes of all these people who said, I know what you said, I know what you said. It's wrong. It's unloving. It's not right. And we have to put ourselves under the discipline of Jesus Christ to say, I will do things only that help and build up, and nothing that tears down. I have gone over. I apologize profusely. I wasn't watching my watch as close as I should have. Do you have any comments? This is now your time. I've taken my time. This is your time. Do you have any comments or questions? We're going to try and get through the rest of them as quickly as we can the next Sunday. And do better. Okay? Are your hearts clear? You understand? Okay. I don't want anybody leaving here going, I don't know, that Bob Douglas, he sure is, he's an 80 grit guy. I don't know. Well, if I'm rubbing a little bit, I'll take just a little bit of that, because we all need to change a little. The body of Christ is to be transformational. Do you know what transformational means? We're supposed to walk in one way and walk out a different way. Not by a bunch, but by a little. It's supposed to, by the transforming of our minds, make us closer and closer resemble the person and the example of Jesus Christ.